Today, we're reviewing Frustration, a game that... Whoa, hold on a second. I meant to say we're reviewing Post Mortem, a game that is even more frustrating, and was developed and published by Microids with an initial release in 2002. The game is set in 1920s France, in a stereotypical dark stormy night environment, and stars artist Gustav McPherson, who gets called upon by a lady called Sylvia Blake to investigate an unusual murder. Once upgraded to a private detective and starting from nothing, he has to bribe and talk his way into getting information, eventually even getting to speak with the main inspector on the case. Unfortunately though, what starts out as a semi-interesting plot quickly descends into a farce, with the story going off on a tangent involving immortality, crazy people, brotherhoods,
the Brotherhood of the Supreme Order of the Rosy Cross,
and mystical objects. Of course, no adventure game has done that before, have they?
You are the detective, are you not?
To make matters worse, the gameplay also gets worse, with puzzles going from annoying but completable to ones that involve the very worst of any pixel hunting experience I've ever had in a game. The game is very adult in nature, and has scenes definitely not suitable for a younger audience, although the slightly pixelated graphics from that era end up adding some sort of censorship by default. Speaking of which, there's a mixture of 2D and 3D environments, with characters in 3D and the rest of the scenery involving 2D imagery. As you traverse throughout the areas, you will notice this, as the game only lets you look around yourself from a fixed position, and you simply click to move to the next spot when you see a symbol with 2 feet appear. It felt a little bit odd to use at first, and isn't perfect, but I got used to it relatively quickly. Most of the characters look okay for an early 2000s game, although some animations can look a little bit wonky. The highlight of eye candy in the game comes in the form of pre-rendered cinematic cutscenes, which are shown when you enter a new area, or at certain key points, although these are only brief. Throughout the game, you're serenaded by a constant mix of background music that changes depending on which area you move to, with these areas accessible via a separate map screen. Dialogue is voiced fairly decently, again taking into account the area that the game has made, but unfortunately the dialogue system itself is a bit of a mess. There are often multiple options that you can choose from, and while you can pick which ones you initially use, eventually you may have to go back into a conversation and pick some other options anyway, as they may unlock further investigation routes in the game. It also makes for a very disjointed conversation, as you can be replying to something said much earlier in the conversation. Another related issue occurred when I accidentally clicked on a recording for a second time, and because conversations are unskippable, I had to hear the whole rambling monologue again, which took a few minutes. Because the game lets you pick dialogue, and also which area you visit, you can very quickly stray away from what is deemed the correct route that is used by guides, and you will definitely need to use a guide, with the end result being that some options can be locked off, and the guide's referring to stuff that doesn't even make sense to you, because you've done it in a different order.
I'm not giving up, Inspector. Quite the opposite. I will be back when I have some news.
In the worst case, you can end up like I did, struggling to find out what I needed to do when a candle didn't light up a painting, even though Gustav says that it should highlight some areas. I literally had to go back through multiple areas, revisiting any one that I could, just to find a bit of dialogue that I needed to select to enable that candle to work. Actually, it wasn't just some dialogue I needed. There was also a hidden key that I hadn't found earlier, that opened a lockbox that I knew needed to be opened, but that I had no idea where the key would be. I spent a great deal of time tracing my mouse over every area that I could, and had still missed it until I checked a guide. But then, an even worse experience happened. Even though I'd found the candle, and now had finally started to highlight areas in the painting, the very worst of pixel hunting experiences occurred, with me spending over half an hour trying to find some symbols so that I could progress to the next area. Unfortunately, even a guide couldn't help, as the only one that showed a picture of all the locations was inaccessible to me due to another issue with the game. It crashes every time you alt-tab out of it, so that meant every time I needed to look at a guide, I also had to restart the game. It really does make you want to scream. Another awkward puzzle involved an issue with the poor 2D graphics in the game, as I struggled to read the dates on some stained glass windows that related to an orrery. Then there was a puzzle that involved rings of letters and numbers that could be selected. Initially, I hadn't been able to read the pixelated letters well enough, and started changing stuff through trial and error. After getting nowhere, I checked a guide, but even the guide didn't fully explain that the number portion of the puzzle was only set on one axis, and that the other section was meant to be left blank. This then led to another puzzle in the same room, whereby I had to mix different powder compounds together. There were some number squares on various pillars, and you're expected to spot that they all add up to the same number, and then also relate the symbol on each number square to each of the powders, so that you can work out how much of each to mix together.
I do not want to be mixed up in all this. No thanks, it's not for me. Way too complicated.
Of course, there were some easier puzzles too, such as one which was just a spot the difference puzzle, and had me constantly swapping between two paintings, trying to find the differences between them, and it just ended up being tedious and awkward, offering little in the way of excitement. Then there was a cutscene that sets you up for sneaking through an asylum, only to just have you walking backwards and forwards through corridors, pressing levers in the right order to unlock a room. Literally nobody else was present. One of the earliest tasks you're given is to use your artistic skills and draw a mugshot of someone who is considered the prime suspect of the murders. You have to go through your notes and make use of descriptions to give you a hint of what type of eyes, hair, mouth, ears or nose to select. It seems like it could be fun to do, but when the correct options don't always match what the description says, it pretty much spoils the whole system. My initial attempt was very close to what was required, apart from the fact that instead of medium-sized ears, the game wanted the largest ears, and instead of small dark eyes, I again had to go for the larger option. It wouldn't be so bad if I knew that these were the things that needed changing, but because you're not told which specific thing is still wrong, I ended up just cycling through all the options and getting lost. A lock-picking puzzle added more tedium via trial and error, and set up a situation whereby I had to use an alternative method to get into another door, as my source of lockpicks had run dry.
What am I, a locksmith? Do you really think I have this great supply of lockpicks or something? Really, Mac?
This second door then needed me to use a hammer to break the lock, but you're not told that you need a hammer, nor where it is, so again, unless you're looking at a guide, you'll be lost and going in circles, wondering how on earth you can get through this second locked door. Anyway, at least poor Gus wasn't all on his own throughout the game. You also get to play as another private detective called Elowin, whereby in a flashback section of the game you learn more about the events that led up to the murder. Fortunately, most of this section just involved lots of dialogue. There are less than a dozen other characters in total that you'll meet throughout the game, so the game world feels like quite an empty place to explore. Indeed, it doesn't help that most characters have the personality of a corpse, which leads me on to another complaint about the game, relating to inventory management. All of the items you pick up are either automatically referred to in conversations, or are simply sheets of dialogue or pictures to look at. Very few of them can actually be selected and then used to interact with another object, so it took me by surprise when I needed to use something on a corpse lying in a basement area. Of course, I had no idea at the time, and simply trying things out requires scrolling through every item painfully slowly, and even then I found out that it was an item that I'd probably used only once before in the entire game. Yes, that's right, the game wanted me to photograph a corpse with some sort of ancient camera. Of course, I'm bound to think of that. Who doesn't photograph corpses whenever they see them?
Mac, I don't know what to think anymore, Mac.
Anyway, I could carry on complaining about this game forever. You probably already get the picture by now, or maybe not. So I shall finish up by saying that this was literally a game of two halves. The first few hours were acceptable, if a little underwhelming, and dialogue heavy. But in the final few hours of the game, which I shall add took around 10 hours for me, there are numerous puzzles that make the game a real chore to complete. Indeed, although I eventually completed the game, I was not able to get all of the endings, as one potential ending was locked out to me, due to not being able to get Berenice to make another fake letter so that I could enter a secret club. The save system allows manual saves, so I could have gone back, but I would not know how far, and I definitely wouldn't want to repeat any of those awful puzzles. So there you have it. A contender for the most bad puzzles and agonising amounts of pixel hunting to be placed in just one game, and a story that is about as cliched as they come in the adventure genre. On that note, thank you for watching, and see you again in the next video. Hopefully. Goodbye.
Ciao, Mac. Take care.
You again! Sir, I have nothing more to say to you.
This case is really beginning to get on my nerves.
My God, I do not believe it. Let me warn Inspector Lebrun immediately.